why are all these either illegal then, or basically not for human consumption? And I say not for human consumption because essentially there are products out there which they have to actually clearly label it. So I mentioned earlier about Psalms. It can actually be sold. You can actually go on the internet now and buy a bottle of Psalms off a website for about.
Not that we're saying
definitely
that.
don't do this. This would make this clear.
Yeah.
You can actually sell, but I actually found something on the internet, and it must actually say clearly not for human consumption. So there's a product called War-Torn Labs with a Z, Stacked AF Psalm Blend 4-way, which sounds fucking mental in itself, doesn't it? And it costs £70, right? You go buy this right now. But on the side, it says in big letters, not for human consumption, for research purposes only. I mean, for fuck's sake. There's obviously a lot of gain to be had with a lot of these. There's clearly a gain to be had. Otherwise, people wouldn't take them. People would rely on them to win at sports. Fucking look at Lance Armstrong, for example. Fucking won all those Tour de France's. Turns out he was absolutely juiced out of his fucking head for all of it. Yeah. So there's obviously a reason why people are taking these things. But there's obviously got to be a downside. Otherwise, why are they illegal? Why are you not allowed to use them? There's obviously got to be a downside. There's a lot of reasons for this. One of it is a source, I'd say. You've got to be careful of the source because, as we mentioned with Brooksy in the little snippet before there, is that if you're not in part of a circle or a clique that is, been exposed to stuff for a long time, for all you fucking know, as Tom said, Dodgy Dave could be giving you a syringe of rat poison. And next thing you know, you're fucked. You have no idea, dude. How do you know? You have absolutely no idea because there's no regulation with it. You've literally got to trust Dodgy Dave, behind the, in the gym showers, to hook you up. So unless you're in like a little area where you've got a really close knit of guys who are giving you the good stuff and they know how to help you with it, it's a fucking minefield. So that's one reason why there's a huge downside to it. And that obviously leads on to regulation. Most of this stuff isn't monitored or regulated. So for all you fucking know, you could be having some random blend on there, Or if we go to another darker note, which someone actually mentioned to me off air, was crime. Are you potentially funding crime as well? Because it's not legal. So it's obviously an illegal racket where they get this stuff from. So you potentially funding crime, which then could be going on to fund other stuff, which is even more sinister than the drugs themselves. Do you know what I mean?
You was mentioning Lance Armstrong earlier, and you actually reminded me of a conversation I was having a while back here with a member at my gym. And so, like he had to return his medal when he got found out. I remember having a conversation with someone in the gym at the time, and they said to me, "Oh yeah, like didn't he have to return his bike after he got found out?"
Return his bike.
Yeah, the conversation reminded me of that. I completely forgot about that until now.
Tom,
fucking made
like
me
when
chuckle.
I don't know, like a police officer, like an American program, has to like give up their gun and their badge and stuff. I can just imagine it's like the Tour de France. You got to hand up your bike.
Lance Armstrong had to return his bike. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, it's my bike, my helmet.
He had to walk into the committee office. Still in his gear. Still in his gear, his little running gear, and he had to running gear, cycling gear. When I say cycling, I mean bike, not his,
cycling of drugs,
not his performance enhancing stack. And having to say, I'm really sorry, I'm handing in my badge, my gun, and my bike.
We've also got other negatives as well. So another really common one is high blood pressure. Now you obviously don't want chronic high blood pressure because that's not obviously that's not a bloody good thing. If you see it the good thing is though, I'm not obviously saying do this, but I'm saying there's a lot of stuff which can mitigate the effects of high blood pressure. So if people know what they're doing in this space, they will tell you if you're having high blood pressure issues, you can go to go somewhere and get blood pressure pills, and they'll sort you out pretty easily if you know what you're doing. Obviously, we're not fucking doctors, so you can. I mean, if I'm being honest for a second here, if you actually are on this sort of stuff and you're listening, hopefully not, but if you are and you've got high blood pressure, you can actually go to your doctor because even though it's illegal, it's not like you're not.
Well,
they have a duty of care. So if you went in there and said, I've got really high blood pressure, it's because I'm taking XYZ to look fucking absolutely stacked from my summer holiday, they would probably be able to give you some sort of blood pressure pills to help that. Another one we've not really touched on actually is testosterone as well. So that's obviously the big one, and something that is pretty clear when you start taking things like this, anabolic steroids, stuff like that, your testosterone will cease to naturally produce. That is something that pretty much happens universally across the board, that it will stop. We do get some reports of people saying it never returns. Like you never start producing it afterwards, like once you come off this stuff. I think it's more people have maybe taken it for a longer period. I'm not really sure. There's not really much on it in terms of, it seems quite random, basically. If you're very unlucky, you'll never produce testosterone again, essentially, after you come off this stuff, which is obviously not a good thing. But then normally for most people, it should come back after a little bit of time. But yeah, while you're on this stuff, because it's obviously doing it for you, your body's like, oh, okay, I won't bother then. And obviously that's an issue when you come off of it. It's going to take time to get back to those levels again. So that's something to be cautious of. Most of the side effects you actually see online that have been reported, they seem to be quite varied. And a lot of people, actually the vast majority of people, it seems to be, don't actually receive many sort of significant side effects. That's the same with the long-term ones as well. And the problem is because it's obviously such a stigma of it, and it's obviously illegal, is that what's pushed in your face is the reports of the the serious issues, the fucking people wrapping their beans in, people dying for taking too much, and which is fair enough, is that whole scare tactic thing. But if you actually look at it on a wider scale, it seems to be that if you know what you're doing, people seem to be okay.
Another thing to consider here is obviously we're talking about the side effects in regards to when you're just taking one thing. Yeah. When we look at bodybuilders that have snuffed it over the years, very rarely are they taking just one thing.
Stack on top. Yeah.
Now, one thing we like to say is the poison is in the dosage. So it's all very well us talking about testosterone and clen, etc., and talking about these single ingredients. But when people are running stacks and you've got one thin pole on top of another that each has its own side effect, eventually you're going to hit that toxicity threshold. So it's something to consider. You have all these people running crazy stacks. As I said, there are some researchers that have commented that they've not even seen half the shit that some bodybuilders are now taking. Simply because it's always
this is issue in the sporting sense, because like in the recreational sense, like when I was talking about earlier about how most, like a lot of people don't really report much, or there's not in the wider scales, because recreationally people don't tend to do as much, like they don't tend to push it that far. They tend to be more reserved. But when you're in a sporting sense, obviously you're going for glory, you're pushing yourself a bit further. That's when you start to take risks more, don't you?
Oh yeah. Well, for some people, like their livelihoods, rely on stuff like this. Especially those that are like physique competitors, etc. Pro bodybuilders.
Yeah, it's a massive risk to take, though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, of course.
Tom, I'm having a diggy here, mate. Other things that could potentially happen from the use of these stuff is you'll get some degree of hair thinning / baldness.
Cheers for that.
Most will also get hair growth in parts they probably don't care for, which is quite interesting. So,
The upside down effect.
Yeah, exactly, the upside down effect. And then one that's actually quite common that a lot of people do associate, and you probably recognise, it's skin degradation. So that is kind of like more pimples. So when you get like people with the acne back, for example, that's like a really common giveaway. Yeah. Someone suddenly has like a savagely
monstrous traps, whilst covered in pimples.
Yeah, and that is something you probably listening will have heard of, and may have seen in your time, which is not actually, it's actually quite in the circles where people take this stuff, that apparently is kind of a pretty dead giveaway. It's quite a common thing that happens, is that someone suddenly gets spotty,
and then you've got to go and use the same bench press as them. Oh, grim.
Yeah, that's not very nice, is it? Not very nice at all. So something I mentioned on the chat at Brooksy there when we spoke about Clen was the liver issues as well. So obviously that's an oral supplement, and this is something that happens with pills. Not the injections, but with the pills, is that the liver will basically get into fucking shit state essentially, because it's trying to process these already taken supplements. And obviously when you're taking quite a lot of them, like he was saying, he was going to 7 a day, was it? Mm-hmm. For something that's quite fucking toxic. Yeah, it's quite a lot. Yeah. So your liver that's why obviously he said only 2 weeks at a time. And it's basically the same for blood lipids as well. So blood lipids is the term used for all the fatty substances found in the blood, basically including cholesterol and triglycerides. And that can have an effect on that as well. So while you might look great on the outside, basically what I'm trying to say is that on the inside there could be a lot of damage going on without you necessarily knowing it, and that's why you could potentially be taking years off of your life without you even knowing. And then we've obviously got the obvious one of cardiac issues, such as risk of heart disease, which is something you see quite a lot. You'll see when top athletes, for example, tend to keel over and they find out they were on these substances. It's potentially, it's normally a heart condition which has happened. That's because they're taking way too much, and as Tom said, they're stacking. They're not just having one; they're stacking loads on. The heart can't take it, and they look great when they die, but not on the inside.
Some of these guys really take it far. I mean, have you ever heard of a palumboism or palumbo gut? This is more to do with things like human growth hormone, etc. Okay. But it's when guys are running serious amounts of stacks, and usually it's high amounts of HGH, human growth hormone, and they get the old elephant gut. Yeah, I can't imagine like going into a box looking like that. To be honest with you, it's pretty grim. But that's just my opinion.
With all these side effects, though, I mean, obviously not serious ones, but some people actually do use them as a way of saying that it's working, because having those side effects is a massive indication, isn't it? Like, okay, it's actually doing something now. I'm actually getting the benefits, and then that links with the whole placebo thing that Tom mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
All makes
great!
For
I'm in hospital. It's working.
Yeah, as I said, not the serious ones, but maybe the lighter
an oxygen
ones.
mask, brilliant.
Well, it's also an indication it's the real thing, isn't it? Because if nothing happens, you might think, is this fake?
Oh, I'm dead. Great.
I'm dead. Yeah, I don't.
Cracking.
I love how you're going to the serious one, but yeah.
It casually got worse and worse.